It gives me great pleasure to open the grand final of Manchester EUDC 2013. I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister from Berlin, Hauke.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, we believe that states in general have the duty to provide the means for their citizens to engage in sensational experiences, in aesthetic experiences that enriches their life, and therefore is a means for their happiness and self-actualizations. But we also think that it has a duty to provide means for the citizens to identify the issues in society and spark a discourse about it so that they can make better decisions when it comes to the democratic process. We think that art ultimately is one of those means and channels and can achieve those kinds of things. But we think that can only be achieved if this art is recognized and accepted by the average citizen and your population in general. We therefore think that the state should only fund those kind of arts that basically get recognized and accepted by your populace. A quick note on our mechanism. We think that whenever a new art project, an artist is funded in our society by local authorities or even by national authorities, there's going to be a jury drawn, pretty much like juries in trials from the general populace that then get to basically inspect this kind of proposition, this kind of project, and then make a vote whether this is going to be funded, whether the exhibition of this is going to be funded or not. Pretty simple, we think so far. But why do we think that this actually needs to be done? Why can't we just fund any kind of crazy or innovative artist that has not been yet approved by our society? First of all, why do we fund art in general? We think we do fund art in general because we believe that art actually has the possibility to emotionally connect to people about issues that are underlying in our society and maybe need to be talked about, maybe need to be solved. We also think that art can sometimes just entertain people and offer like sensational experiences, aesthetic experiences that they just find very enriching in their lives and they therefore find valuable. We feel like in both of these cases, art can only perform his duty or can only have this benefit if it's actually consumed by the people, if it's actually viewed by the people. And we think, therefore, it needs this kind of acceptance and recognition. That's why we have things like, for example, bombed out cars that came from the Iraq, from suicide bombings in our museum. That's why we have big public projects like the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, which is a huge piece of art, even though it's an abstract piece of art. We think if people accept it, if people can actually connect to that, it will have a long-term benefit. But why can art sometimes also repulse us? Why can art sometimes also confuse us and therefore diminish not only the merit of the very specific piece of art we are just watching or experiencing, but also all future arts in general? We feel for sometimes art just is so abstract, so strange and confusing that we, as a normal citizen, feel that we cannot connect to the things the artist might have in mind behind it. Or we might even find it outright repulsive if it's used by some kind of products of digestion and we just feel like this is very strange and weird. Maybe seeing the artist more than kind of a crazy person than just be like someone who wants to send us a message which is valuable and legitimized in society. We feel in those kind of instances ultimately leads to us being rejecting this art in general, but also, therefore, having a spillover effect to all other arts I might consume in the future. Basically, generally seen art as less useful, maybe as less contributing, and therefore not consuming any future pieces or works of art, but actively avoiding them. We feel in those kind of instances, there's already a harm done because I'm basically deprived of my ability to maybe connect to more valuable art for my personal life or even the society in general in the future, and should therefore by all means be avoided. I take opening.
But don't you agree that art is there to challenge perceptions? And how can you challenge perceptions if you only give the people what they already want, what they already agree with, and therefore only feed them what is commonly accepted?
Okay. That's a good question. We pretty much expected something like this to come up. Recognize, Mr. Speaker, that if I write out reject an art, right, there is no challenge of perception because I'm just not I just don't want to think about it. I don't want to explore it further. I'm basically overshadowed by my feeling of rejection, and maybe by bitching about it to my friends, and by talking all about why this is a waste of money from the state, and why this is basically something that is just disgusting and somehow like awkward. And we're feeling like in this kind of cases, this kind of inner dialogue of why this is valuable or what could have meant is often shut down and shut out immediately, and therefore the benefits can't accrue. But why do we feel that the backlash on art in general, that's what they're going to bring up, right? Innovation is stifled, artists can't find their money, is not as meaningful and can still be accrue. We first of all think that innovation is only really or more valuable if it's incremental. I can still build upon things I know are accepted in our society, that I know have already some merit in society, and still have some innovation by just building upon it. But we also feel that for me as an artist, it's kind of my duty to basically connect to my audience, to not be away inside my ivory tower and do some crazy things of arts that no one understands, right? I have an artist, if I have a message, I have to make sure that this message gets to the people it needs to get, and this is understood, right? There is no mean for me basically talking in some kind of language to you that you are not understanding, because then all the messages I want to get across basically never reach the audience, right? And we think the same is true for artists. That's why they should be incentivized to use means that are actually accepted and recognized by their audience. And we feel ultimately that even if we get a little bit less kind of art of this crazy and innovative, and if there was some benefit for these kind of arts, it can still receive public funding, right? It's not that they don't have any abilities to do this kind of art at all. So we feel if they feel it's so valuable by themselves, or if they still want to do it just for themselves, they can just apply for public funding for that. Because lastly, we think the state has a kind of duty for its citizens to use the resources we usually give the state, right, in forms of taxes from the populace, which basically means I take some time and energy, and the product of that time and energy, pretty much like slavery, for the state, and then redistribute it to the people, which is a pretty harsh thing to do. In order to that to be legitimized, we feel it needs to be accepted by a population that the kind of funding or the kind of means that flows into is valuable and is accepted. We feel especially if art isn't recognized by society. You often get this idea that the elites of the state are just wasting your money for something that isn't really benefiting you or your neighbors or your society, and therefore creates a legitimization problem for the state. So due to all these reasons, because we think art can be very useful, but it's only useful and beneficial if you recognize it, if accept it, because then only then you can think about it. And we think ultimately the state has a duty to spend its resources in a way that's not wasteful. We are proud to stand the proposition.
I'd like to thank that speaker for his speech. And now to open the case for the opening opposition from Lund, I'd like to call upon Pia.
The times, they are changing, as Bob Dylan said. And for those changing times, we believe that people need to recognize the changing environment and find new answers to them. And we believe one major tool for doing that is art, namely art that challenges people's perception and gives them new ideas. What we are going to show you today on Upside is that their proposition fundamentally undermines art's possibility in doing so. Because first of all, we believe every art, even if not recognized by the majority but by a small group, has a merit. We believe that the purpose of art is challenging perception, and this is best done by the art that is not recognized by the majority of the population, because recognition by them would mean only confirming social existing biases. We also think that this art would not be sufficiently funded and not sufficiently exist without state protection, and that's exactly why we need state funding in these points of art. Thank you, you'll hear more to clap later. For some rebuttal first. So we hear this is kind of like a political tool from this side, and it's only valuable if recognized by all people. Well, we'll talk about it. A political tool would assume that the state already knows in which way society should develop. We believe that's not really how society works, and that's not really how cultures work, because cultures are a sum of a lot of people who by themselves and by individual interests develop themselves, engage with each other, and thereby develop new norms. And we hardly believe that you as a state with incremental change can kind of develop that in that region which you find suitable by making these policies and by asking individual, probably more or less conservative citizens in this group. Afterwards, you talk a judging panel and the mechanism I'm not even going to talk about. It's probably a bit ridiculous, probably very conservative, but we buy that argument for now. Afterwards, you talk about entertainment for the people versus a certain other benefit. We agree entertainment might be interesting, but you probably also agree it's far less important than a social discourse started by art, and we're going to show you that social discourse is far more important on our side of the house, even though we do agree that probably entertainment value falls on your side, but in the end we'll show you entertainment value is far less important than social discourse. And as a last point, you said they might be bitching about it, talking about it to their friends. Awesome, we want social discourse. The more people they spread it to, the more people they tell them how outraged they are. Maybe they are outraged. Maybe some of their friends are equally outraged. Some of their friends won't be outraged. You can't tell an incredibly good idea, or incredibly new idea, or incredibly changing idea and be offending all people. You might offend some people, some of them won't change their mind, others will. And if you look at how every social change happens, it usually doesn't happen by community consensus, it doesn't happen by everyone agreeing, but by a small group reaching out to a slightly larger group, reading out to a slightly larger group, and that's exactly what we're proposing and what we're helping at with this motion. So, first of all, why is there some merit? As in the motion it says, it's just the average citizen not realizing it. That doesn't mean that there's no one recognizing it. Probably there's at least some people in the State Department recognizing the artistic merit, otherwise they probably wouldn't fund it. So there is some purpose and some merit inside the art, if you understand it, if you're willing to engage with it, and we do believe that some of these experts might be able to realize that this might potentially be art. Second of all, there's a purpose of art of changing people's behavior. Why is this so important? Why is there state interest? Because we have ever-changing environment. The internet coming up, our social relationship changing, isolation of people, generally technological advances, and generally a changement of the environment surrounding us. And we can't always find answers to that in traditional art forms. And we can't always expect them to find them in those art forms, because those art forms are not stable. Many things that you right now consider to be art, and many things that you right now think are a valid tool of artistic expression, did not used to be so in the past. To give you one example, comics used to be considered something for children, not worth reading and without any artistic expression. But they developed, and some comics, for example like Mouse, win a Pulitzer Prize and enable, for example, me by reading them to understand the Holocaust and to understand social alienation in a way much better than any traditional art form could ever do, and therefore elevate the definition of art, namely to graphic novels, but also elevate our understanding of the world. And there's no idea and no purpose of you saying that you can define it beforehand and make it dependent on social acceptance of what is art, because those definitions fundamentally change. Yes, opening.
Sorry, people often feel that especially those kind of experts chose this kind of art and its value is therefore constructed by the elites, but not connecting to the society. That's why they feel disenfranchised, not only by art, but also from the people that chose it.
Okay, so you get the point that they might feel disenfranchised, and we might agree that some people might disapprove of how their money is spent. But if we value between some people disapproving of how their money is spent and the general progress of society towards a more favorable society that more adapts to social norms and generally will be more livable for those people and generally provides this quality of art, namely us adapting to societal values and adapting to change, we believe that's far more important than some people being offended, and some people think their money is not wisely spent. They don't think it's wisely spent on poor people. They don't think it's wisely spent on old people. We think that's still very valid for them to think, but it doesn't mean us stopping investing in the right and good cause. So afterwards, why is art particularly good at doing this? Your art that you're proposing is particularly good at confirming bias. If you look at art and if you think that this is art, this confirms a bias, at least your bias of what is art, and probably certain other biases of what is acceptable in society and what are acceptable social norms. You talk about emotional connection and rejection. We think those are all very valid expressions and all very typical for art, because what art does, it takes you out of your normal social context. It takes you out of your everyday life and potentially makes you think of it and reconsider social structures and reconsider social norms that previously exist. Of course not for everyone, but for a significant amount of people, and especially for a significant amount of people if they're constantly exposed to it by making art public and by making art accessible for those people. So, if it is not recognized by people, if it's really, really good art, we believe it's fairly likely even that people might reject it. We believe it's fairly likely because it challenges their core values, it challenges their core beliefs, and their core ideas that they hold, and it might challenge their stereotypes. And we believe that it's far more important and very, very helpful for a significant change in the future at significant exposure. Last point. If we don't have state funding, if we don't have sufficient state funding, of course this will not completely stop art. Some people might still do it, some people might still engage in new forms of art, but we don't believe that's sufficient. A, because there's less visibility. The state can offer property, the state can offer them to install monuments and installations all over the place, or all kind of different exhibitions or actual engagement in the public space by not forbidding them to do so. So we believe that's extremely helpful. Second of all, it's fewer resources, fewer venues, fewer advertising, fewer networking, and especially fewer money for those people to rely on the possibility to make art and to make a living out of it, which lastly leads to fewer people doing it, and those fewer people being from specific social classes, namely those social classes who can actually afford of making art. And what we firmly believe is that you want to engage in social change, and if you want to engage in a broad public discourse, you need to enable a broad amount of the population in doing so. And you can only do so by broad state funding without your political agenda of only supporting certain arts or by not supporting them at all, because you might say that state is neutral if it doesn't support any art at all. It's not neutral, it's supporting those who can afford it, and those are usually the ones who already conform to the state discourse and state biases, and that's why we firmly beg you to oppose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Pierre for that speech. And now, to carry on the case for Berlin and the opening government, I'd like to call upon Niels.
Before anything else, Hauke and I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone here who made this magnificent tournament possible. Especially all the volunteers. Your great service to our community made me particularly proud to be a member of the Manchester Debating Union. What I will talk about in my speech is two things. First of all, social change and why we actually help minorities to reach out to the rest of society. And secondly, about disenfranchisement and why this policy is really, really harmful for the perception of art in general and the perception of the state. This first point will completely clash with Pierre's point. Pierre says we need art to confront ourselves with new ideas out there, particularly probably these new ideas of particularly probably minorities who are disenfranchised in our society right now by the common sense of the majority group. The problem we have is that with the current system of art funding, we undermine the capacity of these minority groups to reach out to a larger group. Why? The only way a minority group who's right now disenfranchised and discriminated against to connect to the everyday person is to spark empathy for their living, to spark empathy for the situation that we're in. All the civil rights movements in America, the black rights movement and the gay rights movement, for example, got particular empathy when they were kind of beaten down on the street by the evil policemen as a kind of in a backlash to their movements, to their rallying on the streets. And this backlash, this kind of suffering we saw on the streets, this really kind of resonated with the rest of society because it was a feeling the everyday lay person could connect to, could understand, because it was part of the feelings they themselves also kind of lived through in their everyday lives and when they themselves feel this suffering. This is why we believe that it's crucial that all the art from these minority groups is actually picturing things the lay person can resonate with, can make conceivable in his own world in order to make it possible for him to feel empathy with his minority group. We think comics are probably a great way of doing this. We think mouse will probably be funded in the future as a way to kind of teach this to the lay person in your daily life understanding, because it's a medium that is used that is also very accessible to you for the layperson in your everyday lives. Our policy incentivizes these minority artists to actually make their art in a way that is accessible for those people. And therefore we sort of trickle them towards a way that is better for their cause, because they portray now in the future their art in mediums that are kind of established and therefore accessible, and also in a way that is accessible for them. Closing.
Sir, under your model, what are the odds that the mainstream public will actually fund art that is actually resentful toward the mainstream public, art that puts a mirror against of oppressions and so forth, and who will fund this art?
We think it will work as long as the art is good enough. This is the thing. As long as the art is good enough to break the resent and spark empathy, we think this is the only way to make the art effective in the first place. Otherwise, all of Hauke's mechanisms are working. Our mechanism makes sure that these minority artists work hard enough to make their art good enough so that it can resonate with society. Otherwise, we simply throw money on them, but this art has no real benefit for the rest of society, and therefore keeps them just in the situation they are right in. Right? Maybe some elites then empathize with their situation, right? But this makes no political change, because our democratic system usually is not kind of governed by a few kind of art curators who have their votes and can sway things, but rather by the everyday lay person who now is changing their mind in favor of gay marriage, for example. This is changing things, right? Not some curator doing things, because the everyday lay person is what, decides at elections and is giving civil rights. No, thank you. We also believe that this alienates people from art in general, and therefore kind of makes all these things impossible. What's the mechanism here? Pollock art is the best example. This sort of art where you have, it looks like just someone throws some paint on things and, everything is going around. We think this has two effects, right? Number one, people feel that this seems to be a normal thing, but, they don't have the capacity to understand it, right? But there are some other people in society who seem to have the cleverness, the intellectual capacity to see this deeper meaning by their higher thinking. The problem is, quite often, those class of people are all correlate with the higher stratus, with the elites of society, who sit in these posh places and look at these sorts of arts, right? Therefore, those people may have the feeling of inferiority, may have the feeling that they will never be able to be part of this class of people who can understand this art, and by the same time are quite often also lawyers, right? Therefore, their incentives to actually be inspiring in their life, be trying to be an intellectual, be trying to work on their intellectual capacity is undermined, because they have the feeling that this is probably something they will never be able to reach. But even if this is not true, the other thing that may happen, that they feel that they are rip-offed, right? Because apparently someone is just talking something into something that is not really there. This is terrible, because they have the feeling that there's a higher class that exploits their position of elite power and their elite position to use taxpayers' money on their cause, right? On something that, talking something into something that is not really in there. This builds the feeling of a relationship of domination between a higher class. They're kind of using their intellect, using their power, their special position in these posh places to use my money for their cause. This is terrible. This undermines trust in the institutions of the state. This undermines trust in those people who make decisions in our state, because they're seen as just collaborators with these higher classes which exploit their position. This is terrible for people connecting with the state, kind of this general attitude, right? You know, put all politicians into one bag, hit on it, you will ever hit the right person. This is the kind of attitude that is sparked by it. This is terrible. I beg you to propose.
I'd like to thank Niels for that speech. And now to continue the case for the opening opposition team from Lund, I'd like to call upon Emilia.
Okay. Oh, hi. So, right, what we agree on in this debate is that we do want to fund art. The question is what sort of art we want to fund. What I'm going to talk about is expand a bit on Per's idea what the purpose of art is and the actual importance of unrecognized art specifically, and why this art won't exist in sufficient amounts if we cut away state funding, and also in the long run, what's the interest of the state and the general harms by not allowing this. But first, a few points of rebuttal. So they talk about MAOs being funded now. Well, generally, under your model, that wouldn't even have been funded 50 years ago. And sort of, you said a couple of points that you were talking about the civil rights movement. We sort of on this side say, yes, that's a demonstration, not art in that form that this debate is about in general. And even if the civil rights movement would be art, it wouldn't have been funded under your model during that time anyway. The sort of second point is, that you brought out, is that you want to give certain groups agency, like the gay rights. But what you're actually doing is forcing them into a specific way of expressing their opinion in your model by EUDC. So we don't really see that you're giving them agency, you're just forcing them to act in one direction that's already confirming the views of the general public that would be voting on these issues. So sort of what they also put out is that it would be elitistic in the way that we have. We do agree that it is problematic having a board choosing what the state should fund. It's a problem that there is a certain elitism involved in that. But we think your model is even more problematic concerning the issue of elitism. Because taking away state funding, you would not be able to have as many people carrying out art. Generally, you just allow those who already are economically independent to be carrying out art. And we think that that would just give a one-sided perspective of what art could be brought out to the public and which art could exist. And we believe that is even a more probable elitist approach to art in general. So sort of, you say that people distrust the state if you show them art which they do not like. We think on the opposite. We think that people trust the state even more, that the state shows that it's tolerant and want to show different opinions and legitimize them and allow them to exist. So we do not really see that people would distrust the state to a further extent. So sort of, let me just reiterate what Per told you before, what the purpose of art is. And we've said that it's about changing perceptions and norms of society, about engendering social change. And that might sound very fluffy and strange, and sort of, what could it possibly be? If we do consider things like the vagina monologues when they came out, they were scandalized. People would never have voted to allow the vagina monologues to come out. It was something that did not confirm the general norms of what society should be like and what you think about feminism and women in general. But what you saw by bringing that out, by allowing it to be out there in general, is that some people, yes, they were horrified, they were radicalized, but also another group of people were horrified, they discussed it. They sort of asked, why am I so appalled by this idea? Why is this so interesting? And we believe that's a very good example how this can engender social change. We do acknowledge that everybody's not going to love everything that comes out, but it's enough that a few couple of people like it and that they do adapt the norms and ideas, because by doing so we will have a couple of leaders that could lead the social movement and social change that could follow from that. I'll take opening.
To engender social change, you need to be able to reach your population.
We say, if people do not come to see the sport of art because they feel it's scandal anyway, how do you reach this kind of change in your population?
We don't believe that everybody has to go and see it. No. It's enough that some people will see it, some people will talk about it, some of these people will think that this is so important that I have to take action, I have to change my views and idea of what I think on this topic. So sort of art is particularly good at this, as pointed out. You have an emotional connection and you sort of actively engage in an art experience generally. Sort of, what is the importance of unrecognized art? Well, as we say, if we only allow art that's recognized by the average citizen, we believe that you confirm already existing views and already societal biases, at least the bias on confirming the idea of what art is to be. Unrecognized art is tougher to take in. It clashes with your current norms and your current ideas. It's saying that something with you and what you believe may not be entirely right, and that might be hard to take in. So we do recognize that a majority will reject it, at least at first, when seeing it. But some will continue, but some of them, as we said before, will change by significant exposure to the new art. And why does it matter? When small groups change their norms and ideas, that could engender social change. Because social change usually happens in small groups first, and you need a leader to start a movement, which this would be. Then why would this art not exist sufficiently without state funding? As we pointed out in this case, by reducing state funding, we reduce the visibility, because the state owns the public space. We have to recognize that they could expose the general population to this. If this sort of niched art would still exist in specific galleries, the general population wouldn't access that. So that's one of the benefits of the state. Second would be that they have access to the advertising, also they have access to networks, and generally money. Artists must be able to make a living, and that resources will be funded by the state. Is the state best at choosing always what art is best? Probably not, but we believe that they are the ones with the most resources, and they can find the largest amount of art, and some of that has a higher probability of being good by just the quantity of funding. So what alternatives are there if we would not allow the state to fund? Well, they could probably say that private art foundations exist. We do not believe that they can fund a sufficient amount of art. There's a less probability that you'd get this sort of radical art out there, and we generally believe they don't own the public space. Corporations could probably fund it, but they would probably influence the message, and they don't generally have an interest in these sort of changing radical messages in general. But what we do believe is that this is in the interest of the state. Because when you have a constantly changing environment, we sort of see the shift to the digital world, new norms changing. We believe that the state funding the arts, it would offer guidance to citizens on a channel, and it would offer a channel to update norms and perspectives through, and help them understand the changing environments around them. So sort of, what if we have to weigh this? What could be the possible harm by funding radical art? Well, some people might not go and see it. Some people might be upset. Some people might not really be enjoyed by it. But we believe in the bigger picture we have to look at, that some people will actually enjoy it, and they will change the norms and the perspectives that they do currently have when they find something that clashes with that so substantially, and they're emotionally open to take that in. And by having this group of people changing the norms and ideas that they do carry, we believe that it's a bigger probability that they would take on a struggle for social change and social movement in the long run. And we believe this is good for society at large, and therefore we're very happy to oppose.
I'd like to thank Emilia for her speech. Just a brief word to all of the remaining speakers. When you make a point of information, please use the microphone. Please use the microphone. I'd now like to welcome, to open up the case for Groningen, Stijn.
It's okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring you two big new points, which are, who's best able to judge artistic merit? Are those the experts in the plan of opposition, or are they the average citizens? We think the average citizens are best able to judge artistic merit. Second of all, I'm going to explain you what happens to controversial art under their plan. Because we think it will still be there in our world, and the state is not a good actor to fund truly controversial art. All right. My rebuttal will be very short. First of all, we recognize that art can have all kinds of beneficial effects, of positive effects, right? We don't deny that, and we don't really want to engage with that kind of analysis, right? We recognize that, but we think less of that art will exist in your world because, this truly controversial art which has these effects that you wanted to have, won't be funded by the state. That's my whole extension. Right. So I think if I explain that there will be less of this controversial art with good effects, we win the debate. Right. Who is best able to judge artistic merit? Experts or citizens? All right. We think the experts you want to employ to determine what is good art, what is artistic merit, are very bad at determining just that. And they're even worse at determining what will be perceived as good art in the future. Why is that? These experts tend to be typically be highly educated, right? They went to university, they are upper class, likely to be liberal, likely to be rich. And the essential point with this is that they're likely to be a part of a system of academic knowledge, right? They went to university, and what they learned there, they were given a system with which to analyze what is good art, what is bad art. In what box can I fit new art? Is it... I don't know. Okay. So they were given this system, this framework with which to determine art. Right? We think this is bad, right? Because the system is based on two pillars. First, on history, right? So it's essentially looking backward. It's looking at the past, of what was art in the past, to see what will be good art in the future, right? Second of all, we see that it's based on prestige, right? Good art is typically what prestigious commentators in the past thought was good art, right? We think the problem with this, the essential problem with this, that truly controversial art with truly good effects doesn't fit in this framework, right? It's outside of this framework, right? So what does this mean? First of all, it's not recognized by these experts as artists, so they won't fund it, right? Right. For example, ready-mades in the 60s or in the 90s, I think, right? They weren't really thought of as art. Same with comic books, right? The experts didn't stand up and say, these are comic books. The public thought, okay, they can have some artistic value as well. The experts, because they were so entrenched in this system of historic knowledge, and that, they were still in this rigid framework of determining what is controversial art, couldn't do it. So why is the normal citizen much better at doing this? No. First of all, they have less prejudices, right? They were not brought up with this framework. They haven't thought about what is art for the last 20 years, right? They can judge art with an open visor. Yeah. And second of all, we think when a normal citizen like you and us goes to a museum, he's really preparing for that experience, right? Or if he's going to this test, right? He's thinking, I'm going to see some art. My beliefs are going to be challenged. I want to see something new. We think they underestimate the average citizen. The average citizen is not conservative. He is curious, right? We are curious beings. We want to learn new things. We think the average citizen is quite likely to fund controversial art, and far less likely than the academic commentators. No, thank you. All right. Then what happens to controversial art? First of all, we think it will still be made in our world. Why is that? Because they like to make up an image that the population is homogeneous, right? We think the population exists of different subgroups which has different values, right? We have feminists who like feminism, who like feminist arts. We have environmentalists who like environmentalism, who like environmentalist arts, right? So we think because these people value these values, they like these values, they're also likely to buy art which expresses these values, right? So there will still be a private public, right? That's one part. Second of all, we have mecenases. What are these? These are very rich people that want to look cool, right? They have a lot of money, but they also want to be seen to having taste, right? In their small subgroup of very rich people, it's highly fashionable to be seen with artists, right? To go to the new exhibition at Tate Modern, to be seen as fashionable, right? So what does this mean? That these mecenases with a lot of money are very likely to buy controversial art, right? So we see that controversial art is perfectly fine in the hands of private groups and doesn't need the state to exist, right? Sure. No thanks. I'll take closing.
By that logic, do you think that the public should also have a say in which avant-garde research should the state invest in within universities?
No. No. Of course not, right? Because research has very tangible positive effects, right? If you make it faster train system, you know, it's just tested. It goes 20 kilometers faster, right? But art is something truly personal, right? Who's the one to judge art? What is art? And what is good art, right? Good art says something about the relationship from the person to someone else. Everybody can judge that. Everybody in this room can judge what is good art, but not everyone can judge, you know, in what small subset of nuclear physics we should invest. So we think that's beside the point. All right. Lastly, a very big point, my second point. Why is the state a very bad actor at funding these things? We think the persons you want to employ as art experts, right, they like being there. They have a good job. They are paid to determine what is good art, right? They like the status quo. Right? Because they like the status quo, they're unlikely to fund truly controversial art. Because this art is truly controversial and actually challenges the state system, right? That means that their self-interest is harmed, right? We think realistically, these will be white males, rich, and they don't like this truly controversial art. They have actually a bias against critical art. Right. So, why do we win this debate? First, because we agree that art can have good effects. But that less art with those good effects will be made if it's funded by experts, right? Because these experts like their status quo, they think in a rigid framework in which truly controversial art doesn't fit in, and that's it. Thank you for being here. I really liked speaking here, and I hope that the rest of the debate will be good as well. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Stijn for that speech. And now, to open the case for Tel Aviv A, I'd like to call upon Yael.
Ready? Thank you very much. Okay. When Cindy Sherman in the 70s documented in her photography the nightlife in New York, the transgender community, the drug addicts community, and so forth, she not only created a documentation of an historical moment of a cultural shift in the US, she also created a political change, because nowadays we have portrait of transgender people who have historically have been excluded, lying on the wall in galleries and in museums where even school children can come and see that. Furthermore, she has historically changed the way we perceive the role and the aesthetic possibilities of photography. And that kind of change has generated in later generations artistic movements like the cinematic dogma movement. This is an excellent example why their model is so problematic. Because they fail to understand all the other functions of art. Art is not home decor. Art is not just entertainment. Art is not just, thank you. Art is not just visually pleasing. My first point is going to be basically what is the important functions of art. I'm going to talk about history. I'm going to talk about aesthetics, and I'm going to talk about politics. This is all going to be in my first point. My second point is going to be why the average citizen simply cannot be the lecturer, cannot be the selector, the person who decides what is important. But let's start with quite a long rebuttal. Okay, what's the main problem with the case, other than the fact that they see absolutely no difference between art and home decor? Okay, something pretty you put on the wall. First of all, previous speaker does not want to engage with the whole point about the importance of art, but this is, in this debate, your mechanism will significantly decrease the amount of art being produced, right? You have to engage with that point. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, as for who will be the better judge, we heard a case against like the elitist experts and how experts simply cannot understand. Now, as Tomil said in the POI, sometimes we fund things that only experts can actually realize their future important. For example, academic program. For example, researchers that the public simply cannot even imagine the way they will be applied in the future. Furthermore, your examples about the experts in the 60s is historically wrong. Nobody understood art, Kant art, for example, an important current of feminist art. Nobody understood that in the 70s, other than a very small community of experts and artists. Actually, nobody could have possibly realized and engaged with it in the public sphere. And without that kind of small funding from funds headed by experts, we would not have had artists like Judy Chicago, who changed the face of art forever. No. Okay. Now, we heard about there is some kind of problem with, they're talking about, they seem to feel very comfortable about leaving funding to the private people, but please note that there is a problem because opening up has a problem with elitism. Well, guess what? Under your model, since the state is funding less, meaning relatively a whole lot more art in the art market, in the art field, will be funded privately. And who are those private funders? They are the elite, and their personal taste, and also their possibility to sell later these arts in a higher price because they're also private collectors. This is what's going to define what kind of art will be produced. And under your model, we will have a lot less performance art and video art and things that it's hard to sell back. So we think that this is quite horrible. No. Okay. Let's start with what pieces, what kind of works of art we're talking about. Why are they so important? Obviously, we are talking about things that are not part of like the usual grammar of what we are used to see is mainstream public in museums and so forth. We're talking about things that are shocking, like viscerally shocking, because we see something that is very explicit of violence and so forth. It is maybe weird and something that we cannot understand, like Pollock at the time, and they are political. Now, the public does not seem to understand them. Why? Because and the public doesn't seem to appreciate, because our natural instinct is to seek something that is visually pleasing. But this is not, art is different. This is not the only function of art. Just like the fact that language is not only a way that we use to communicate data, it's a way we use to express things and work in reality. So art has an historical and cultural effect and a political effect, because historically we document something in history, but we also decide when we create this art what will be the history that later generation will be look back. And also when we're talking about the aesthetical aspect, we are actually, like when we create video art or digital art, we are saying, hey, there's a brand new way to experience beauty and create beauty, a way that you did not think about before. And that expands humanity, something that under your model does not occur. I will take opening.
It took, as you said yourself, 30 years until those photographs could be displayed to the majority. Wouldn't it be better to incentivize artists that produce pieces that can be displayed to the majority today?
No, I think it's good to incentivize both. Those that will be presented today and those who will be presented in 30 years, it's the gain of the public. Okay, let's go to my second point. Why do we think the average citizen simply cannot select here? Because art is dynamic, art changes, and only someone who has the ability to see the certain new thing in a historical context can really appreciate the importance of a new thing. For example, when punk music came into the scene, nobody really understood it, and otherwise, except for people who could have seen how unbelievably different it is from anything that came before it, but also how it is special and well appreciated. Okay, second point is art creeps on us. Art works both physically and psychologically, meaning when I watch a piece of art, it works upon me on my senses, right? I see it, I feel it, the colors, they grasp some kind of sensory response for me. But art also goes with the cognitive and moral ideas, and the combination between the two makes the public not always open to creations that might be belligerent toward me, might actually make me feel alienated and so forth. Meaning the public is not likely to fund this actual piece of art. And for those excellent reasons, we call you to oppose.
I'd like to thank Yael for that speech, and now, to conclude the debate for the closing government team, I'd like to call upon Henk.
Thank you for the floor. I'll be discussing the impact on social discourse, and I'll be discussing controversial art, and I'll be discussing who is better able to decide on both of these cases. But first, the points we've just heard. The last point made was a bit tricky to me, like combinations of aesthetics and social relevance don't fit somehow with me. Now, I think if I combine two things I like, I'll probably like them even more. We think people are open to new experiences. They come in a specific context where they know they're going to look at art, they know they're going to be challenged, and as Stijn has already argued, people are naturally curious and they want to understand and engage with new experiences, right? We don't think that stands. Secondly, they keep saying, well, we decrease the amount of art produced. We just don't see how that mechanism works, right? We have the same budget, we're just distributing it a whole lot better, right? That just doesn't make sense. Then thirdly, they said, well, we need advancements into the future, right? We need different art, we need better art, and we need socially controversial art, right, that relates to issues in a way that past art didn't. And we completely agree, which was what our extension was about, which they didn't engage with, right? They make the analogy here with other types of research, and we say that's not relevant because that's technical stuff, right? It's one advancement leading logically to the next advancement. New art doesn't work like that. You have a historic, right? You have a radical break with conventions of the past, right? Abstract instead of figurative. It's just not the same. And the academics and the policymakers in those days looked at that and looked at their like 20 points of good Renaissance art and were confused and didn't accept it and rejected this type of art for hundreds of years. This is not a good way of doing this. It doesn't fit with their established system. We think academics is the worst possible place to look for people who are actually able to look into the future and look at new art. We think normal citizens are much better able to do that because they don't have this burden, because they can look at it with an open visor and judge it on the two things that are actually relevant for art. Does it please me aesthetically in some way, even though I don't understand why? And is it relevant to my social experiences? These are the two things we are looking for in new art. That's what we bring with our mechanism, and that's what their old mechanism of old white men deciding what art is new and what art is better doesn't do. All right, so moving to my own 3 points. First of all, who can decide, right? Now, we all agree that we want aesthetic experiences and we want socially relevant art. So it's a debate between two decision-making mechanisms. Now, the first proposition very rightly said that we put faith in the average citizen, where we say an aesthetic experience is something personal, direct and real, which you can relate to even if you don't have an academic background. Secondly, we said social relevance is about the context in which you live. If you recognize things, if you recognize issues, that will probably get you thinking and you'll value it for that, right? Now, Stijn said it's not just about that, it's about comparing two systems, right? And we see that the status quo is really, really bad. If we just have high policymakers and academics, then first of all, they probably have the same background, right? It's white males. How can they decide for everyone what is socially relevant and what is aesthetically pleasing for them? It's these people who are stuck in these academic value systems. It's these people who are already familiar with a very specific type of elite art and only transfer the values they get from that into what kind of other art might be proper, right? We think the status quo is horribly broken, and just giving random artists money would probably be better, because it would be less conservative, it wouldn't overcrowd the market and the market's value system with just, oh, this specific type of art is the best art. We want a diversity of opinion. We want environmentalists' opinion of what is good art. We want feminists' opinion of what is good art. We want black people's opinion of what is good art. We want to combine these things, and we think that's a much better way of doing it, rather than just relying on this one biased group of people. And that is what you have engaged with first half.
In your model, if you're worried about experts, you specifically said the state still gives it to a public panel which then decides. You're not cutting out the experts, you're not solving your problem, you're adding an additional filter of people. Additional filters means less radical pollution, less radical art in the end.
Okay, that just doesn't make sense. We have a set budget, we dole it out to commissions which are taken at random from the population, and they decide. This debate is about who gets the decision-making power, right? That still makes sense. We're not going to reduce the budget. No one here has ever said that's what we're going to do, right? So that just doesn't make any sense. All right, so moving to my next point. What will, let's see. Yeah, what will be the impact on social discourse in general, right? Because we agree that art can move society forward and everybody wants it. Now, the first proposition I said, the problem is that if you get this very specifically appealing type of art, then people don't understand it and see it as elitist, right? Which alienates us from other art in the future, which is a bad thing, which alienates us from elites, and which alienates us from the state in general. None of this has been rebutted. They also said that we incentivize minorities, right, to appeal to the majority in terms of looking at what type of aesthetic experience they find pleasing, what kinds of forms might be pleasing in the future, and engaging with that, which means they get a financial incentive to go in this particular direction and create integration, right? Now, the opposition said to that, well, we homogenize art, right? We force minorities to get into one specific mold of art. And again, Stijn has argued that that's a radical undervaluation of what the average citizen is able to do, right? We do get this open visor, we do get this curiosity because we don't have this academic burden. We think people are able to relate to this kind of thing. Furthermore, because we have a diversity of people in this opinion, in this panel, we think it's much more likely that some of these people will be able, because they happen to not be white men, because they happen to be from a specific social group, to be able to relate to this art and to discuss it with the others in the panel, right? We think that by at least getting some minority opinions in on the decision-making process, instead of the status quo where we have exactly zero, we think we're already moving it forward. Ah, too late. Oh, well. All right, so finally, so that's that specific type of art. Then also there is controversial art and new developments in the art, right? And again, both sides want it. Now, first opposition said normal citizens reject that. First proposition said if it's truly weird and elitist, there will be a backlash to this. It will alienate people from that. We say that's true, and we say that's legitimate because it is just this walled off little value system that we don't particularly care about and that isn't innovative, right? We added to that truly controversial art, truly new art, truly groundbreaking art, which does have the highest impact on social discourse, as the second opposition you guys have argued, right? We think that that specific kind of art is exactly the type of art that the status quo can't cope with, right? So because we've analyzed that the type of art that has the largest social impact is exactly the type of art that is discouraged in the status quo and that we make more likely because we've argued all kinds of other things which were very, very smart, we beg you to vote our side.
I would like to thank Henk for that speech, and now to conclude the case for Tel Aviv and conclude actually this year's EUDC ESL Grand Final, I would like to call upon Tomer from Tel Aviv A.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud and I'm very happy to finish this wonderful ESL final for Euros. Thank you very much for a wonderful competition. We enjoyed every bit of it. I'm gonna I'm going to have two main clashes for you in the debate today. The first one would be, why do we need this kind of art? And the second one would be, who should be the deciding factor on the funding of that art? Let's begin quickly with a rebuttal. Most of it will be within my points. So just briefly, they continue to claim that the amount of art would not be infringed. Two things. A, the variety of art would certainly be infringed and will have necessarily less amount of different kinds of art. Secondly, the evolution of art will be lessened. Why? Because if we look at the outskirts of art, from the middle, we will go out towards it. When I'm very to the extreme, people will imitate me, not necessarily to that point, but a little bit towards it. Second point of rebuttal. Their entire criteria for this motion today is the visually pleasing. It has to be visually pleasing, otherwise we are not getting any advantages, okay? So, people have variables, people look at art differently. Some people won't like it, some people will like it. Some artists will imitate it to a point, and some artists won't. It's just not enough because we want to show to you that this art can actually bring change. We do not understand, if you are for cultural change, how keeping the art, the status quo, helps us and bring us any closer to that. Okay, let's move to my points. Why do we need this kind of art? So, ladies and gentlemen, if we need this kind of art, and we won't have it without funding, this side of the house win this debate. So, what does first government tells us? They tell us that avant-garde art will draw the people away. Why? Two reasons. A, they will be appalled. So we say some people will and some people won't. The ones that will like it, it's very good for them, we think. But moreover, we think that it is good for the general public because we think that most people that watch this kind of art are artists. They will imitate some of it and they will produce more art. They will produce even maybe something that will appeal to the central population even more, and this is very good to us, okay? Second point, they say that people will feel that they are not good enough, okay? So put a piece of metal, tell the public what that means and why it is important, and we solve the entire problem. Don't be arrogant and just figure out that they will like it, okay? Second point was, we need to incentivize artists. We say, hell no, we don't need to incentivize artists. We want them to be weird. We want them to bring new ideas to us. But moreover, if you want to incentivize artists, it just won't work. Not all artists are market-based working personas, right? They work from their hearts. They work from their brains. They present things that they believe. You would not do that with a little bit of money. So, second government barely addressed that, but they say that controversial will stay. Why would controversial art would stay if you are claiming that if you're appalled by certain piece, you would not see art at all? I do not understand. Okay, opening opposition tells us that you keep the same art and that we lose this art and we would not develop in the future and that will have no social change. What we brought to you in the house is, why is that going to happen? We brought to you what are the most important spheres of art? What is the position and why do we need art? We told you that the three most important spheres within society's life is the political one, the cultural, historical one, and yes, aesthetic one at that. And Yael explained to you why our politics will be better and why our historical and cultural will be better. Concerning his political. So, visually innovative art are usually high political. We see it with punk and we see it with a lot of other. When you're in the outskirts of society, you are more prone to doubt the social structures, to bring new ideas, and to take with you other people. And that's why it's going to work. Moreover, art has an historical and cultural position within our society. When we fund, we decide what is the discourse. When we fund, we can give money to the popular discourse, and we can give money to the extreme discourse. We believe that in a democratic state, the battle between the popular discourse and the extreme discourse makes us better. Why? Thank you. If we challenge the everyday way of thinking, we as a unit become better. I will take first.
Either you incentivize art.
We have time.
Even if you incentivize artists in a specific way so that their art is actually portrayed to the public, isn't it better if it's actually accepted, even if it comes from these weird kind of people, to have any kind of effect on the society today?
I think people are affected in society today. They see popular culture, and in our world, they also see extreme culture. We do not understand why people various discourses, why people world will be better in your world. We'll just see less. Who should be the determined factor in this point? So, closing tells us that the public knows better than experts. We are not sure, okay? Firstly, we have all kinds of experts in culture, in pop. We have pop culture experts and we have extreme culture experts. We can listen to him and we can listen to him and we can come to a reasonable and a very good decision. But moreover, we believe that a cultural change and creating an ethos of a state is within your state's obligation. Within your state's obligation. We want to give money to the vagina monologues. We want to give money for people who are filming and taking picture of the LGBT community within New York when it was highly taboo, okay? We want to put it. Now, it will not be there without us helping. Why is that? Because this art is usually weird and is usually a bit appalling, okay? So the private market would not give all of its money to this kind. Why? Because we agree with you, the vast majority will be appalled and thus will not give enough money and will lose this kind of art. But moreover, we see that today we can do both. We can go to the popular audience and we can go to the extreme crowd. In your world, at the end, we'll get less variety of art and less evolution of art at the end. And because of the political importance of art, ladies and gentlemen, let us all give them a little money to those artists. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Tomer for that speech. I'd like to now invite the speakers to leave the stage, and I'd like the audience to give one more round of applause for the grand finalists.